podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to How We're the podcast from Roker Report. And if you're up to date with our pods, you'll know that we've spent a little time looking back to review the 2024-25 season, and specifically the day out at Wembley and the playoff semi-finals, of course, and every little second we'll squeeze out of that. And of course, it did end up in promotion to the top flight. And we had a suggestion sent through from someone who we have been delighted to have on this podcast in the past to try and compare this season's promotion with previous successful campaigns in going up to the top flight. And in particular, Denis Smith's in 1990, Peter Reid's title-winning sides from 96 and 1999, and then Mick McCarthy and Roy Keane's championship-winning sides of 2005 and 2007, respectively. So before we introduce the man who not only suggested the idea, but covered them all as a journalist, I thought I'd introduce Gavin Henderson, who we also have. All right, mate?
I'm good, mate. Yeah, I'm looking forward to just sitting back and listening to you two dissect the early days. When you said before we recorded, I was just a twinkle in my dad's eye. I think that's a nice way of putting it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. Should be good.
Yeah, let's see how much you can remember from some of those early ones, because, of course, as I mentioned, we also have the man who is the brains behind today's topic and someone who can offer a unique insight as a journalist who covered these promotion seasons. We are delighted to welcome back Ian Murtagh. Welcome, Ian.
It's great to be back. Last time I spoke to you, I said I'll be only too willing to come back if Sunderland get promotion, and happily that has happened.
Absolutely. Did you enjoy it all unfold, and you got caught up in all of the last minute antics that we pulled off?
It's fantastic. It is one of the great playoff promotions. Clearly, obviously the result, the outcome, dictated the narrative. You know, you could be a little bit cynical and say, you know, for all bar the last few minutes of the Coventry home game and all bar the last 15, 20 minutes of the game at Wembley, Sunderland didn't play particularly well. But listen, it's all about results, and they got the ones that matter.
Yeah, that's it. And I mean, from a journalist point of view, Ian, I mean, the stories just kept, we talked to Clive Tilsley, we've talked to Nick Barnes. I mean, the stories just kept kind of writing themselves and coming out, didn't they? The Dan Neil photograph in the League Cup final, then he goes on to take his club up, and then you've got the Tommy Watson leaving and he gets a last minute goal. I mean, it was just stories galore, wasn't it?
Look, I mean, as a freelance football journalist now, it's amazing. Yesterday, Michael Carrick lost his job at Middlesbrough. Yes, I send something, but, you know, national desks, it's a championship. It doesn't really matter. Suddenly, Sunderland, they're interested. Everyone is interested in what's happening. You know, yes, we've had the Joe Bellingham story, but people are saying who are they going to buy, what's happening? And it is a different world, the Premier League.
Yeah. Well, look, we'll get into our previous promotion campaigns.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of compare where we were at, maybe in terms of what our thinking was when we got promoted in those occasions compared to where we are now. I mean, you know, and then the first we're going to look at is Denis Smith's promotion in 1989-90 season.
Yes.
And with the context, you've got to look back where, and I think, well, you mentioned just before we started recording that you saw big similarities, and you look at the backstory. Denis Smith dragging us up from the third division, winning that title first time of asking, which I think was his first biggest job. If he hadn't done that, then who knows? But then he only has a season consolidating us, finishing 11th. And he was kind of building that team without really spending money, young players coming in. He never had any real budget to spend on any sort of player. I mean, Tony Norman was one of the biggest signings when he was trying to build that squad. And then we, in that second season in the second division, got into the playoffs. And then there was that epic playoff campaign against Newcastle and Swindon.
That's right. I mean, listen, I'm going to start off with a downer. Out of the 5 promotions, the following season, Sunderland went down 3 times after those promotions. And I know that there'll be many people, even some Sunderland fans, will think that's the most likely outcome in 12 months' time. But yeah, let's start with his 1991 campaign in the it was the first division in those days, 2 years before the Premier League was formed. But I do see some parallels between Denis Smith's side and this side. You've already mentioned one was that they'd been in the third tier not so long earlier, like this side. That side, they bought in the close season Kevin Ball and Peter Davenport. And they also, this side had what I would say were very promising young footballers, namely Gary Bennett, Gary Hours, Marco Gabardini, Gordon Armstrong, to name just four. So there was, I can remember a sense of realism and also a little bit of concern because, they weren't splashing the cash. And let's not forget the gap between first and second tier then wasn't as wide as it is now. I've looked at the season and Sunderland actually made a good start. In their first 6 games, they won 1, they drew 3, and they lost 2. That doesn't sound particularly good, but they'd the first home game had been against a star-studded Tottenham at Roker Park when Paul Gascoigne made a return to the northeast. And 2 of those defeats, the 2 defeats were very, very unlucky. They lost to a late goal in a 3-2 defeat at Norwich. And it was similarly at Chelsea. They looked as if they could force a draw. I think Kieran Brady came off the bench, played very well. But so that wasn't a bad start at all. Crucially, looking through the whole season, Sunderland never managed back-to-back wins in the whole campaign. Now, you hear managers nowadays saying just how crucial back-to-back wins are. 6 points in the space of 7 days can shoot you up the table. Sunderland never enjoyed such a luxury. In contrast, they suffered 4 defeats in a row in December and 3 defeats in a row in March and 3 defeats in a row in April. There weren't massive losing runs, but that's how they got sucked into the relegation zone, taking it to the last day of the season. And they went down, I guess you could say, heroically with 15,000 Sunderland fans watching them lose 3-2 at Main Road against Man City when a certain Al Quinn was one of the villains.
Yeah. But I mean, just in terms of that going up, because like I said, after consolidating ourselves by finishing 11th the season after coming up.
Yes.
So it was almost like the equivalent of the Tony Mowbray season where we made the playoffs this time around. Dennis Smith ended up finishing mid-table, and we kind of potentially, I know Martin talks a lot about this, if Marco Gabardini hadn't chinned a couple of people that season and getting himself suspended for about 5 or 6 games or something that season, we might have actually made the playoffs. But in terms of the expectation around that season where we ended up getting into the playoffs, was there an expectation that Denis Smith would keep kicking us on? Because, like as I said previously, he had nothing to spend. You look at the signings, John Kay was something like 15,000, 20,000. McPhail was 20 grand. Gabardini was, I think that was about 30 grand, something like that.
It was 80. 80 from
it was 80 grand.
Yeah.
Well, that was one of the big signings, though.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he had zero money to spend, yet it seemed like when I've read back, because I was just a young lad at the time, just thinking Sunderland would win every game. But there seemed to be almost an expectation that he'd just keep kicking us on, which is strange when you look back.
Yeah, I mean, they were the signings when Sunderland were in Division 3 and Division 2. When they went up to the top flight, I can remember the few players Sunderland were linked with, but I think Denis was given around about 800,000 to spend, and he bought Kevin Ball and Peter Davenport. I think Bawley was 300, if my memory serves me correct, and Davenport 350. And then in the new year, he had some spare change to buy Brian Mooney, the Irish winger from Preston. So no, there wasn't a great deal of money, but of course, teams back then didn't splash the cash in the way they do in 2025.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, Gav, just to bring you on this, because obviously before your time, but when you look at like the timing of this, because we got promoted when you look back, and it's one of my frustrations as a young kid, Gav, but we got promoted a few years before the Premier League, but didn't seem to see it coming. And it was potentially a chance to establish ourselves in there before it even got going.
Well, the most Sunderland thing ever, isn't it? I mean, just typical Sunderland to just about miss the boat on Premier League football as it began. And when you look at some of the clubs who were in the Premier League in them formative years, I think Oldham were in there in that original season, weren't they?
Mm-hmm.
Who are now, I mean, they've just won promotion back to the Football League this season.
Middlesbrough,
yeah. I mean, Sunderland have had a bit of a history of doing this sort of thing, haven't they? Just not quite being in the right place at the right time or managing to shoot themselves in the foot. And yeah, unfortunately, we missed the boat. Who knows what would have happened? Although I always think this about these sort of things. You know, everything happens for a reason. And had we not went through what we went through, we wouldn't have had all the great years under Peter Reid maybe afterwards, you know. So, yeah, it is what it is.
Well, I can always remember when the season was over, the general feeling among fans, journalists, and even possibly within the club was maybe we went up a season too early. And I think there was a feeling. I don't know if you can remember this, but the following season was when the plans for the Premier League were unleashed upon the public, and Bob Murray, rather bizarrely, led the opposition to it. Yeah. And there was a petition, and he suddenly got dozens and dozens of clubs to sign this petition. The problem was Sunderland had just got relegated, and the only clubs who signed a petition were the ones in divisions 2, 3, and 4, while the Premier League or the clubs in the top flight say, no, thank you, we're quite happy with this new Premier League. So, and I think that's been forgotten in the time since.
Well, interestingly, we're doing On This Day piece on the site, and I've gone back and I've actually done pieces from 1988 and 89, Bob Murray's opposition to the Premier League. Yeah. And there's a really interesting one of the, and I've actually, we said this on the On This Week podcast this week or next week even, that one of the most interesting pieces in Dennis Smith's book is a story he tells when he goes to see Newcastle reserves, and he gets talking to Sir John Hall, and Sir John Hall's starting to tell him about all these plans for the Premier League and saying how they're going to break away from the Football League, and Dennis Smith says you can't do that because that's against the rules. And Sir John Hall turns around and says, we'll break the rules, or we'll change the rules, essentially. And from that, because he then basically explains that actually, from his point of view, the way he was taking Sunderland up through the leagues, he thought maybe Bob Murray didn't have the foresight to see what was changing in football, whereas people like Sir John Hall were already on the front line with it.
I think that's a fair comment. And also, you know, there was that feeling when they heard about what Bob Murray was doing. People say, well, you would say that you've just been relegated. So, funnily enough, that 1990-91 season, I think Dennis Smith, despite relegation, his reputation was intact. There was no clamour from Sunderland fans for a new manager. And I can remember midway through the season, when he was linked with the Aston Villa job, you know, they did get relegated, but he was seen as one of the rising stars in management at the time.
He was seen as a potential England manager of the future, didn't he?
Yeah, I think that was even mentioned. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
But in terms of that budget, because he also, another part of his book, he mentioned that he was given that 800,000, but there was a caveat to that he wasn't allowed to increase the wage budget, which meant by bringing Kevin Ball in, he had to lose John McPhail, and to bring Peter Davenport in, he had to lose Eric Gates. Because he couldn't afford any more wages on the books. Now, and he claims that, he kind of suggests that if he kept those two older heads, because he had to bring in the likes of Paul Williams, who got tore apart at Old Trafford.
That by Lee Sharp,
he had to bring in Richard Ord at the back, who was still young at the time. And we were full of young players when we had injuries. I remember the injuries to Marco Gabardini and Davenport meant we had a front line of David Rush and Kieran Brady at times during that season, and Warren Hawke as well. I think he played up front against Southampton at home, I think. Yeah. But it's incredible when you do all of that. Yet, if you look at the stats that season, we got a lot of plaudits by the football that we played. A lot of neutrals thought we were playing fantastic football. And if you look at how many times we took the lead and got nothing from the game, it's incredible.
Yeah, and I haven't looked at the exact stats, but there was a spate of missed penalties as well around about the Christmas time. Bawley missed one, Brace missed one. Yeah. And you're right, Sunderland did concede a lot of late goals, and a memorable game was a 3-3 draw at White Hart Lane in early December. Terrific game. I think arguably Colin Pascoe's greatest game for the club. And Sunderland looked on course for a win and ended up drawing it. A game at QPR around Christmas time, I think we took the lead and missed a penalty and ended up losing it. So, yeah, I mean, it was a season of if-onlys.
Took the lead at Liverpool as well in the first couple of minutes.
That's right. Yeah, interesting.
Gary Hours, I think. Gary Hours or Gordon Armstrong. I can't remember.
Right, I remember that. Yeah.
But we played some. I remember, drawn 1-1 at home, and Gary Bennett kind of suddenly finding himself forward on the Sunderland left wing, flicking it over Gary Pollister and smashing it in, because
that's right.
I was just balancing it off, because that Spurs game away from home, I think he was completely out of position when when Paul Walsh got that equaliser. Dennis Smith used to tear his hair out at it.
Yeah, it was. I've got some fond memories. It didn't feel like a season of total failure, if that makes sense. And of course, I think a lot of people thought they would bounce straight back up, but of course it didn't. And Denis didn't last. He got sacked the following December with Sunderland mid-table in the second tier.
Well, we should mention, in the backdrop quickly about the way we went up, though, because you mentioned it was a season earlier, and we did a podcast with Bill Bradshaw, which was one of my favourite podcasts to record. Absolutely fascinating stuff, listening to how he went through the investigation about Swindon Town. And I'll not go into detail because it's all on that podcast. But you do remember that, and actually we are recording on the anniversary of the hearing that decided that Sunderland. Oh no, sorry. It's the 12th or the 13th. We're recording on the anniversary of the one that found Swindon guilty. And then there was a week where they had to decide what would happen next. And then they were trying to decide whether we would go up, Newcastle would go up, or Sheffield Wednesday wouldn't go down.
Stay up, yeah.
Because, of course, Ron Atkinson was on Satan Greavesy champion the chances of Sheffield Wednesday not going down. But you have to remember that we were beaten. I think we ended up finishing sixth, of course, 6 points behind Newcastle. But we were torn apart by that Swindon Town side at Wembley.
Absolutely. Lucky to get nil. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you look at some of the runs during that season, and we weren't one of these sides who go up by blowing the second division away. And it's funny because the other thing that happened as well during that summer was Bob Murray went to a league meeting for the FA where he lobbied with other clubs that they were going to increase the top flight to 22 sides. So the next season, there was only 2 teams got relegated from the top flight. That's right.
Yeah. It's amazing, but I think Bob was, let's say, very pragmatic in his views at the time. He had Sunderland's interests at heart. And even if there wasn't always a logic to his argument, his arguments were made in good faith.
Yeah. But you said this one was the most comparable with the most modern one. I mean, because you look at it and I see, yes, of course, I think with the third division and the way we potentially built the squad, quite a young team, if you think the Marcos and the Gabardinis, the Armstrongs and the Hours, and even Colin Pascoe was on the young side. But you do that comparison, but I do think, as you said, we thought it was a season too soon, purely because at that point, which I think is different now, the club seemingly couldn't keep up with the progress that Denis Smith was making.
Yes, how many managers over the years would say that? To say, if only the club had matched my own ambitions. Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the parallel to me with the fact that there was a good crop of young players who Sunderland needed to make that next step, having already made good steps. And at the beginning of that season, Marco Gabbiadini was on fire. Absolutely, and his partnership with Peter Davenport in the early months looked very promising indeed. I can remember George Best writing an article saying Marco Gabbiadini for England, and I think he got an England B cap. Was that played at Roker Park at the time? I think it was
against Czechoslovakia B.
That's
I remember
right.
that.
So I don't think he was too far away from an England call up.
No, I think he was there or thereabouts. But I think that injury that season, really knocked him, didn't it?
It did. I think he would admit himself he was better in the first half of the season than the second.
Yeah. But we did eventually go straight back down, and I think that's probably a good point to move on to our next one, because Gav wants to try and get into one that we can actually that he can actually remember. So we'll jump to the 1995-96 season, and a bit of background on this one, because I remember, I mean, I was in my teens at this point, and I remember this coming completely out of the blue, because we'd gone through that period, and Gav said, you never know what's happening next, but we had to go through a good few years of struggle under Mick Buxton and Terry Butcher. This season, the season before saw us struggle against dropping to the third tier for what would have been the second time in our history. And actually, it would have been the second time in less than 10 years, actually, if that had actually happened. And Mick Buxton was sacked. I think it was after a defeat at Barnsley
on a Friday night. Yeah.
Yes. And the club was in, and I mean, if you see the state of the club, I mean, we've spoken to John Ficklin before, and he said he was surprised when he came in at that time to find the club was almost ran like a social club. And if you think about this night where Mick Buxton got sacked, Dominic Matteo was in that side.
Yes.
And Brett Angel, I think, made his debut. And Dominic Matteo we nearly got docked points because he wasn't registered in time.
Correct. I mean, how they managed to avoid it, I don't know. I think I'm right in thinking, had they been deducted 2 points that have gone down?
Yeah.
And I was fortunate in the press box on the side, but I remember what a miserable experience that night must have been for Sunderland fans, because I can remember it was a windy night and there was shale and loose bits of, not concrete, but dust was blowing right into the faces of the 4,000 or 5,000 Sunderland fans there. And I would imagine Sunderland fans have had some pretty miserable experiences. I'm sure that would be among the worst of them.
Well, yeah. Can you imagine that, Gav? You're fighting, you're down at the wrong end of the table. You've just on transfer deadline day, you've signed Brett Angel for all of the money that John Ficklin had invested, 700 grand or something like that. You've signed a young lad from Liverpool who has to go straight back because you didn't register him in time. And then you sack your manager, Gav. I mean, Sunderland were an absolute mess at this point.
Again, typical Sunderland, isn't it, really? Nothing surprises you when you hear these sort of things. And I always remember growing up, the Dominic Matteo one. I had the All the Lads book when I was a kid. Remember that one, Chris? Which you got? I think you got that. You got that free with your season ticket one year.
Those are the days when you got free stuff for season tickets.
That's it. And I used to love flicking through that one. And Dominic Matteo always used to be one that was particularly interesting to me, because I used to think, well, he's playing for Liverpool now, and he used to play for us one game.
Oh, yeah.
We were a proper mess back then, weren't we? But you hear all the stories from the time from players who played for us and stuff about the way that Peter Reid then came around and galvanised the squad and managed to just get people believing again. And it became the theme of his entire time throughout at Sunderland, didn't it? With Reedy, just lads like to work hard for him. The culture off the pitch was almost as important as it was on the pitch. And if that part's not there at Sunderland, if it's missing, you're destined to fail. We've seen it even in more recent times with other managers who've the culture off the pitch hasn't matched the culture on it, and we've ended up struggling. I mean, look, no better example than right now with Regis Lebris. The culture off the pitch is brilliant, and it's reflected in the performances and got us promoted. But yeah, back then, obviously, if things weren't right, we were always in danger.
I mean, from your point of view, Ian, reporting on all of this because we'd gone through the Terry Butcher era, spending money and play, like car crashes with all of our new signings and things like that. Then the Mick Buxton era. From a reporting point of view, it almost must have been you're almost reporting on a laughing stock for a good 3 or 4 year period.
Especially when 14 miles up the road, Kevin Keegan was performing miracles at a rejuvenated Newcastle. Yes, I can't. Well, I want to talk more about sort of the season in the Premier League.
Mm-hmm.
But funnily enough, that season when Mick Buxton was sacked, I can remember Sunderland clinching promotion at Burnley, and the fans chanted Peter Reid's name all throughout the game. He was the Messiah. Now, it was 12 months later that the song was compiled, Cheer Up Peter Reid, but his popularity was so high after saving them from relegation. And of course, I think he'd only signed a short-term contract initially. So the next season, although very few fans expected promotion, I think there was a feel-good factor back in the club after the misery of the previous 3 or 4 years. Sunderland, they had some bright young players developing, namely Michael Gray. We've got Craig Russell, and of course Martin Smith.
Michael Bridges as well.
Michael Bridges was slightly later, wasn't he? I mean, what an impact he made. So that season, I remember it sort of came to life round about early December when there was a 6-2 win against Millwall. Craig Russell scored
6-0 because the 6-2 was under Malcolm Crosby.
Yes, I think you're right. Yes, but Craig Russell scored 4, didn't he?
Yeah.
And suddenly, I think that's when people thought, "Whoa, can Sunderland get promotion here?" And the second half of the season, there were no really resounding wins. Apart, I think there might have been Barry Fry's Birmingham 3-0. But that second half of the season, I thought it's almost a paradox. Despite consolidating the position at the top of the table and going on a long unbeaten runs, there were warning signs. For instance, at the time, Sunderland's promotion was based on sound defence rather than any more repeats of that Millwall game. And most fans would agree that player of the season in the second half of the season was a certain Shay Given, who took over quite controversially from Alec Chamberlain. I think he kept 12 clean sheets out of 17, and everyone knew he was going to be a star. I'm sure I know Peter Reid would have loved to have signed him, but he ended up signing for his former Blackburn boss, Kenny Dalglish at Newcastle. So the other thing, I don't know if you remember, Chris, but the last 3 games of the season, Sunderland failed to score. 2 successive home draws at Roker Park. And then on the final day of the season was at Tranmere, and they lost 2-0. Now, that was bizarre because while Sunderland had already clinched the title and were promoted, that was a day when Newcastle, who probably surrendered the initiative to Manchester United in the Premier League title race, but they drew 2-2 at home to Tottenham. And I can remember when news came into Prenton Park that Newcastle were losing or drawing, and Sunderland fans, that they took absolutely no notice of what was happening on the pitch. They were just cheering. So there was a despite the result, there was a very celebratory mood among the away fans that night, that final day of the season.
Yeah, I mean, Gav, talking about that promotion, and we're going to talk about comparisons with the current promotion. Peter Reid that season, he only brought in Paul Bracewell and John Mullen in the summer, and actually, when you look at what Labrie brought in, Gav, it was virtually with the same squad as the one that finished 16.
Yeah, it's something we've talked about a lot recently, isn't it? That he's not really added a great deal to the squad this season, but has simply put his own shine and style on the way we play, which has then I guess, galvanised the players that he's got, because we saw season before this one trying to play a possession style of football with a manager in Tony Mowbray who just sent the players out there to attack. It works when it's great, but, you know, when things aren't going so well for you and you're still trying to play that same way and you run out of ideas, it doesn't work. Then we got Michael Beale, and we know what went wrong with him. And then we had Mike Dodds till the end of the season, and the players didn't know whether they were coming or going. And Regis Lebris basically had a style of play from pre-season, which evolved over the season, but the core and the base of it was still there right throughout till the playoff final. And you know, it matches up perfectly with what Reedy did. I mean, very little change in terms of personnel. But then you look at some of the top performers from that season, or the ones who made the most appearances. Michael Gray, who you mentioned, he'd made his debut, 4 years earlier? Something like that. Darius Kabitsky, who was an ever-present that season too. They were the two ever-presents. Martin Scott, Dickie Ord, Borley had a good season. Yeah. Andy Melville, 40 appearances. Craig Russell, 41. So, you know, it was virtually the same players every week as well, wasn't it? It wasn't a case of we were swapping people in and out. It was virtually the same team throughout the season, give or take. So yeah.
And then, of course, towards the end of the season, Michael Bridges was Sunderland's very own super sub at 17. I think he snatched victory from the jaws of defeat with 2 goals against Huddersfield. And I can remember really rollicking me for putting in the paper that he reminded me of Marco van Basten, the way he glided along the pitch. And to this day, I still think, you know, of course, injuries like Marco van Basten ruined his career, but the impact he made, everyone knew he was going to be a real star in the making. And I believe he would have partnered Michael Owen for England in the 2002 World Cup, but for injuries.
Yeah, and those 2 goals against Huddersfield were against Tony Norman. Tony Norman was in goal for Huddersfield that day. But Ian, on how Peter Reid did this,
yeah,
like I said, Paul Bracewell was that just piece he needed in the middle of the park. But his other big signing in terms of who he brought to the club, I think, who galvanised everything, someone well known to the North East press, was of course Bobby Saxton. And then you look at the likes of Richard Ord and Andy Melville and players who actually their careers were floating at Sunderland, and he just turned them into real players.
And you know something? It's an overused expression in football, but I'm going to use it for this team spirit. I know that to this day, a lot of the players from that 95, 96 side are still firm friends. You know, Kevin Ball, Steve Agnew, Martin Scott, Andy Melville. I think an awful lot of them do keep in touch, and there was that camaraderie which cemented that team, and probably was worth a few points over this course of the season.
Yeah, and just quickly in terms of comparising and with the most recent promotion, looking at scoring goals, because that season only 9 sides scored fewer at home than Sunderland, who won the title. Craig Russell was top scorer on 13 goals. Phil Gray got 8 goals, but he had that contract issue, didn't he, where Peter Reid kind of ended up ignoring him for a bit.
That's right. Let's skip or fast forward to the close season after Sunderland won promotion. And I did say earlier that there were warning signs because it wasn't a prolific team. Now, if you remember, the signings that Peter made were Niall Quinn, and now Shay Given went. Tony Coton came in, who was in his 30s, didn't last long because of injury, and Alex Ray. I think they were the signings now, and I think Lionel Perez, who was initially perceived as just Coton's understudy, but it emerged as the number 1 keeper. Now, it was that season. You looked and you thought they looked decent signings. Coton and Quinn, yep, good signings. And of course, Quinny, the first. I don't know if you can remember, but there was a bit of an anticlimactic goalless draw against Leicester on the opening day of the season at Rugger Park, and then Sunderland. They went to Nottingham Forest and won 4-1, I think it was. Quinny got 2. And I remember the intro, what I wrote that day. And it's probably the first and last time it ever appeared in a tabloid paper. I said it was a quintessential Sunderland performance.
Very good.
Yeah, well, I thought so at the time, but I don't think I'd have been able to say it again. But anyway, so, and then after that game, Sunderland, they went to Liverpool and they got a draw. So, at the start of the season, they were unbeaten after 3 games. And then I was looking at where they were after Boxing Day. And after Boxing Day in the league, Sunderland, they won 6, they'd drawn 5, and they'd lost 9. Now, that wasn't bad at all, really. On January the 11th, Sunderland beat Arsenal 1-0 at Roker Park, and they were top half of the table. I think they were 9th, if memory serves me correct. And, Sunderland, I remember Peter Reid talking about looking up the table, not down. But, again, warning signs were there. Quinney had done his cruciates and didn't play again after October. And then after that 1-0 win against Arsenal, Sunderland won just 1 of the next 12 games. They got sucked right into the mire. So, it's what that's telling you is that you can take nothing for granted in the cut and thrust of the Premier League.
And just to add to that one win was against Man U.
No, yeah. It was. I think was it against? Was it Manchester United? No, that was subsequently. That was in the remaining games. I'm thinking from January to March. Am I right? You think it might have been?
So the game after the Arsenal victory was Manchester United, because they'd played Porto during the week.
That's right.
And they'd hammered Porto, and they arrested a few players to play us.
Yeah,
and we beat them.
Just looking at the team there, still a strong team though. Schmeichel, Gary Neville, Phil Neville, Denis Irwin, David May, Ronnie Johnson, David Beckham, Eric Cantona, Brian McClare. But yeah, on the bench, Giggs, Andy Cole both got rested for that one.
Yeah. And I think the alarm bells really started ringing very loudly after a 4-0 defeat at home to Tottenham when Stefan Everson scored. I think he might have scored a hat trick, and then the closing weeks of the season, there were 1 or 2 decent results, weren't there? I think the really crucial one was it the losing to Southampton 1-0.
That was the big one.
That was the killer, wasn't it? That was the killer.
I think when Graham Souness went in the manager's office after, I imagine that must have been a good meeting after when Souness went into Reid's office. But do you think that deadline day when do you think there was an air of we're okay, because there was only Waddle who ended up coming in?
Well, if you can remember, I think a couple of us wrote the story in the autumn about £10 million to spend. And anyone who's watched Premier Passions will see the chronicle of that season. And, Paul Scholes was linked. And I think John Fickling admitted they did try and get Paul Scholes. He was a young player who hadn't established himself at the time. And then, of course, Jan Dahl Tomasson, later, who played for Newcastle and went on to have a hugely successful career at Milan. He was pictured at the training ground. So, and there was another player, an Israeli striker,
Ronan
Harazi, who was going to sign and failed his medical.
He had big pins, didn't he, that they didn't know were there in his leg.
That's right. And I mean, clearly that season, it was what a lot of Sunderland fans feared. They just didn't have the goals to stay up. Infamously, Craig Russell was top scorer with 4.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely goals up, but it was a really strange one that because Martin Smith was, whenever he played, he seemed to do well in the final third. Craig Russell, I mean, and most of his games were from the bench that season. He ended up top scorer. But there was times you go back to that Southampton game and Reedy went with one up top, and it was Paul Stewart.
That's right. I mean, Paul Stewart was a fine footballer, but he just didn't have the killer instinct. I thought, nice guy as well. I remember, and when Waddler came in, and he did lift the team to a certain extent, and I can remember the final day of the season at Wimbledon, I never thought Sunderland would lose that game. And that, I don't think Peter Reid did. And I thought most fans were thinking it was going to be staying up, but in maybe 17th place. And it came as a shattering blow, that defeat for Sunderland.
When you look at that run towards the end of the season, it wasn't horrendous from us. We drew with Forest on the 22nd of March, drew with Newcastle on the 5th of April, then narrow loss to Liverpool, beat Middlesbrough, narrow loss to Southampton, battered Everton 3-0.
Yeah.
So we weren't in horrible form, really.
I think it was late January, February, March when the form was really bad. And yes, it did pick up when Chris Waddle came, but just missed out. And of course, Coventry City, that team at Sunderland beat all the time these days.
And they had to kick off that late that day, didn't they? As well, funnily enough, we've got a history of doing that.
Yeah.
But let's move on to the next one, which was again Peter Reid. But it kind of follows on from this one because we do say we went down.
Yeah.
Then the first season at the Stadium of Light, which was a lot of pressure. And I think in this day and age with social media, I think and Martin's touched on this before, that I think Peter Reid sacked after the defeat at Reading, I think, in this day and age, the following season.
Quite possibly.
But we end up going on to get 90 points, miss out on the playoffs. Then the following season, just quickly on that, because, again, it's a sign of the times. In this day and age, that team would not stay together, would it?
No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't. You're absolutely right. But I can remember Quinny saying that the seeds for promotion was sown in a, if you pardon my French, in a piss-up in a pub after the the playoff defeat against Charlton, and Sunderland thought this isn't going to happen again. We'll go one better the next season. Now the season, the 105 points season. If you remember, I think didn't Kevin Phillips pick up an injury very early on, and Lee Clark, and yet it was almost imperious, wasn't it? Right from the outset, you just knew Sunderland not only were going to go up, but they were going to win the title.
Well, when you talk about Kevin Phillips' injury, the response to that, he got injured. I remember it was a League Cup game, wasn't it? Away at Chester, and he broke his toe. He actually scored. He scored in that game, and the following game we didn't have obviously Phillips available, and Quinny was on the bench. We started with Danny Dichio and Michael Bridges up front, and battered Oxford 7-0. That was the response to losing.
That's right. I mean, Sunderland had two outstanding strikers, a hugely promising kid in Michael Bridges, and Dichio. He did a job for Sunderland. If Quinny was going to be unfit, people would say, Dichio will do okay. And so there was real strength in depth there. And of course, the great feature that season, I think most fans who remember, was the almost telepathic partnership down the left between Michael Gray and Alan Johnson. More about him later.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I think Sunderland did one promotion at Bury. It was a night at Bury. It was late April, and I remember driving home that night, and the A1 was covered in snow.
And we invaded the pitch. There was thousands of Sunderland fans on the pitch after the game.
Did Sunderland have both ends behind the goal today, and a lot of seats as well?
Yeah, I did a bit of a lap of honour on the pitch, and I was clapping the Bury fans, and I took a bit of the pitch home with us, and I can't even remember where that went. I think I went back to the pub after we got back on and then I think I lost it in the pub or something like that. But this season, like I said, top of the table, late October, never knocked off.
Yeah.
Didn't lose a game till the 19th league game, and then we lost 3-2 at home to John Hendry's Barnsley.
Yeah,
we made the semi-final of the League Cup as well during this season,
and possibly could have gone to Wembley. Yeah,
well, we've done an interview with Martin O'Neill, and he said we scared the life out of them in those two.
Absolutely.
And it was actually Tony Cotty was the difference between the two sides in those two games.
Yes.
But just as a team, and again with the context of going up, as Gav already touched on, Ian, Phillips 23 league goals, and he was out for a period. Quinn 18 league goals. Dichio 10 league goals. Bridges 8 league goals.
Yeah.
Now, me and Gav's been running a campaign because we seem to have lost strikers in the game. Now, I would argue that any of these four strikers would get into any Championship side in the season just gone.
I wouldn't put up a strong argument against that, Chris. I can remember when the season finished, in stark contrast to the feelings now. Sunderland fans weren't asking who we're going to buy, who we're going to buy. They were just dying to see this side unleashed on the Premier League. You know, nobody thought there was going to be a relegation struggle. And it was strange. Let's kick off the 1998-99 season. They lost 4-0 on the opening day against Chelsea. Now, the one player who'd left, if you can remember, in the close season quite acrimoniously was Alan Johnson, who had allowed his contract to run down because he wanted to play for his boyhood side Rangers. And you know, he fell out with Peter Reid. But I'm going to give you a question here, see if you can answer it. In that close season, who was Sunderland's first signing? And it was for... Go on.
Thomas Helmer?
It's a great answer, but it's not Thomas Helmer. It was Carsten Friedegaard.
Oh, yeah.
The Dane who was seen as a replacement for Alan Johnson. Now, Peter Reid, it's strange because you mentioned Helmer. Friedegaard, I think, had one substitute appearance. Helmer, who had a great career at Bayern Munich, he only played once. 3 years earlier,
sorry to cut across you. And didn't Helmer go on to play in the Champions League?
I'm not sure. I think did he?
1860 Munich. I think.
Wow. Because I also remember 2 or 3 years earlier, he'd signed the Swedish international, Jan Eriksson, who played one game at Aston Villa. So there were these three players, you know, two of them great pedigrees, another one who everyone was excited to see, Friedegaard, and they just never did it. But there were some good signings that season. There was, of course, Stefan Schwartzkame was a great player for Sunderland. Gavin McCann did well. Lee Clark, of course, had gone out.
Well, I was just about to say, Ian, just in terms of because if we talk about the start of that summer, because actually I've got a question for you. Actually, you threw a trivia question at us, so I'm going to throw one back. that promotion season, who was the player who played the most games beyond Thomas Sorensen in that season?
The promotion season, I would have gone for Michael Gray.
No,
I guess no.
In that promotion season, it was Andy Melville.
Andy Melville, right?
And then, so just in terms of players who left, so you've already mentioned Alan Johnson left.
Yes.
You've already mentioned Lee Clark left. Michael Bridges went to Leeds for $5 million.
Of course.
Andy Melville, who played the most games other than Thomas Sorensen, he left. So there you've got four players who were huge, really.
Yes.
In that promotion season, who left. So everyone was thinking, hang on a minute, what's kind of happening? Because the expectations, we had the Stadium of Light, we had this 40,000 odd all-seater stadium going up the Premier League. First time, really, we could pin our hat on it and say, actually, we can give this a go.
An awful lot of optimism.
And then those four players leave. I mean, that wasn't a great start to the summer when you think about it.
I can't remember sensing concern among the fans because, as I say, McCann had come, and of course, what proved to be an absolutely inspirational signing, Steve Bold.
Absolutely.
Now, free transfer, you know, the other side of 30, and I think he only played the first half of the season. Now, when Sunderland lost against Chelsea on that opening day, it was their first league defeat in 18 games. You know, I think the previous one had been against Watford in January. And so I think it wasn't trepidation thinking, oh, what is this going to be a step too far for Sunderland? It was bafflement. There were fans were saying, how on earth did we lose 4-0? This great team of ours. And of course, what happened was the midweek game, I think, against Watford, they won and didn't Kevin Phillips score. And do you know, at Christmas, do you know what Sunderland's league record was? I've got it here. 11 wins, 4 draws, 3 defeats. And the game that sparked it all off was, of course, the famous derby in the rain, Ruud Gullit's derby, when he left Shearer and Ferguson on the bench. And when Newcastle were beaten on August the 24th, Sunderland were undefeated until Liverpool beat them at the Stadium of Light in November. I mean, it was staggering. And of course, I think it was it the game or two after Newcastle when Kevin Phillips really announced himself as a player of top flight pedigree when Sunderland demolished Derby at Pride Park 5-0.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Gav, we talk about social media regularly and the meltdowns, but even though we'd just come off the back of a 105-point season at this point, you can imagine that 4 players leave like that in this day and age in the social media. There would have been a meltdown, wouldn't there?
Yeah, and we didn't have a great pre-season either, if you remember. I know pre-season's a training exercise ultimately, but the results coming out of pre-season were great. We got beat off Halifax. We lost to Preston, and we drew in Kevin Ball's testimonial against Sampdoria 0-0 at the Stadium of Light. So we didn't go into the season with any form of momentum, even coming out of pre-season, and then get beat 4-0. So you've got all of that, as well as losing important players. And I think you hear some of the players from the time talk about that game against Chelsea. I think although in hindsight we can say this, but it's probably true. We probably needed a kick up the arse, really, to kind of tell us, bloody hell, it's a bit different up here. You know what I mean? And after that point, I think, we just flew. But even you look at the team from that Chelsea game, Steve Gould, who Ian mentioned before, funnily as well, Steve Gould played 20 games for Sunderland, yet even all these years later, is still remembered as an absolute legend.
He's still one of my favourite defenders that I've ever seen in a Sunderland strip. I mean, just on that, what Gav's just said, Ian, that summer, Stefan Schwarz was a huge signing to get the fans almost thinking in a different frame of mind, wasn't it?
Correct. Do you know, I know, Gav, you're saying all these players left, but I can remember fans thinking, oh, well, as long as Quinny and Phillips, we've still got them, we can do anything. There was so much faith in that pairing, little and large pairing, and of course that faith was rewarded. They were absolutely outstanding. And, a goalkeeper in Sorensen, who was Sunderland's best goalkeeper for quite a while, Michael Gray, he'd won England caps Sunday in the promotion season, and he was doing well, and people thought Schwartz, good signing. Yeah, it was, I cannot recall there being any sense of fear really going, even after that Chelsea game.
But the response from Peter Reid was on the Tuesday night, we played Watford at the Stadium of Light after the Chelsea game, and he handed debuts to Stefan Schwartz and John Oster on that night. Went with a total different pair, whereas I think Chris Lumsden played the Chelsea game from the start and got took off at half time.
Yes.
Young kid started that game. So, we responded well. We got a 2-0 win. Kevin Phillips, of course, scoring the 2 goals, which solidified him as still a good goal scorer. And, kind of kicked on from that point.
The rumour... Oh, sorry, go on in.
I was going to say, and of course, the real highlight of the season was the return fixture against Chelsea when Sunderland won 4-1, 4-0 up at half-time, with a central midfield pairing, incidentally, of Eric Roy and Paul Thirlwell. Now, I remember that game because I was there, but I wasn't covering it. I'd actually left the Journal on the Friday, and I was starting on my new job at the Star on the Monday. So I went to the game, and I remember sitting in the press box thinking, I wish I could be writing about this. It was a phenomenal performance. Everyone remembers Kevin Phillips' great goal there. And I can remember, I think it might still be on YouTube, but was it Barry Davies interviewing Peter Reid, and Peter Reid saying, "We're not bad, are we? I'm glad you've come up. You'll have to come up and watch us a bit more." And so that I'm sure there will be plenty of people listening to this. It might have been supplanted maybe by the last couple of games, but that must be ranked among fans' favourites.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if you can remember this, Chris, or not. And it's not something that's in my memory, which is why I'm asking. But Marcel Desailly came off at half-time in that Chelsea game and was replaced by a certain John Terry.
Is that right?
But actually, there was a couple of times that season because Niall Quinn basically tortured Desailly that day. And there was another occasion, Sol Campbell came to the Stadium of Light with Spurs.
That's right.
And Niall Quinn just he couldn't handle Niall Quinn. And Niall Quinn just got that new lease of life, and he had Summerby basically putting it on a sixpence from anywhere. But it just worked. But sometimes with Peter Reid, sometimes these things just fell into place.
Yeah. It was simplistic football, and I mean that in as a compliment. Yeah. It was, stay organised, get the ball out wide to Summerby and Schwartz, or later possibly Kilban, put it into the middle. Quinny wins the ball, and then Phillips lashes home. That was the theory, and that was the practice as well.
Yeah, I mean, Gav, our campaign's going well to bring back wingers and a big man, little man, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. We next season, let's go out and sign the biggest striker we can find to play with Eliza Mayenda.
I mean, again, just on this, like this situation of the momentum that we had, would you say, Ian, that this one is the furthest removed from the current situation we find ourselves in now?
Great question. I think not even the most wildly optimistic Sunderland fan will predict them finishing 7th this next season. We knew that was a very, very good team. They'd come up with the highest points total, hadn't they? 3 points for a win. So yeah, it was tremendous. And you look at that season and the following season, and the only disappointment is Sunderland didn't qualify for Europe because, in both seasons, it at certain stages, it looked as if they could. In fact, the following season, I don't know if you remember, they after winning at West Ham, they were second in the table, and they drew disappointingly 0-0 at home to Bradford on I think it was a Sunday afternoon before Manchester United were coming. And I remember the national papers were saying, Manchester United was saying this was a top of the table clash. Sunderland was second in the table, and no one was saying they were going to win the title, but they were Manchester United's nearest challengers.
Yeah, and of course we can't leave this without mentioning that first season back in the Premier League or the Premiership as it was called, I think at this point. Kevin Phillips, European Golden Boot, and I mean you must have been hearing loads of whispers because apparently Spurs were really hot on him.
Well, he was the hottest property in the country, wasn't he? And he was absolutely dynamite that season. You knew he was going to score 30 goals. In fact, every single game, you just expected he'd score. And, that was his peak. I think that and the previous two seasons, the playoff season and the promotion season, he was averaging, was it? Virtually 3 goals every 4 games. It was a phenomenal ratio.
Yeah. And Gav, just quickly before we leave this period, I can't help, but I've said this before, but only time in my lifetime where I've walked to the Stadium of Light or walked to watch a Sunderland game and just went, how much are we going to win by today?
My dad still, even when we were at Wembley, was talking about this era, as he said, you'll never see better football than that. Never, because you know what I'm like, I get excited, don't I? And I start talking about like this, that and the other. And he's like, nah, it'll never, ever get better than that. He said, that's the best football I've ever seen at Sunderland. With Quinn and Phillips up front, Johnson and somebody putting the balls in, the hard lads in the middle of the park winning the tackles and even chipping in with goals. He will take that to his deathbed. That will be the best football we'll ever see at Sunderland. And I almost feel sorry for anybody who didn't get to live through that. Maybe we're a couple of years too young or whatever to have been able to experience that Sunderland team. Because for me, it was my grounding as a fan. Like my dad helped run a branch. We never missed a game, home or away. Didn't matter where we were playing, we went. And that was like that. You imagine kids now going to the games and they're admiring the likes of Wilson Isidore, Luke O'Nien, and Dan Neil and so on and so on. They're their heroes. My heroes were Quinn and Phillips. You know what I mean? My heroes were the best forward pairing that Sunderland have probably ever had in relative terms. And even to this day, before the before the final of the playoffs, they had Quinn and Phillips on TV talking about their time together at the club. This is a team that finished 7th in the Premier League. We never actually won anything with this team in terms of like big European trophies or even domestic trophies. We never qualified for Europe with this team. Yet still, when there's a chance to get Quinn and Phillips together on TV, Sky will do it. I mean, they were an iconic pairing, and we'll still be talking about them till the end of time, I would imagine.
Yeah, that fair comment, Ian. Before we move on, we'll never see football like that.
You'd love to think so, wouldn't you? That you would see it again. But I would imagine most Sunderland fans would include possibly both players in their all-time Sunderland 11. That's as big a compliment as you could pay the pair.
Yeah, and the next one we'll go through is completely different mindset. But I just want to start off by saying that I think, if you look at when Mick McCarthy took over the end of the Peter Reid era, and then obviously we had Howard Wilkinson before that, and he had to take over that 19-point season. But I think it always goes underrated, Ian, the job that Mick McCarthy did to turn that side around within 2 years.
Throughout his time at Sunderland, he was never dealt a fair hand, really, was he? Yes, they won a losing run, which he couldn't stop when he first came into the Stadium of Light. He did pretty well to halt the slump the following season when Sunderland lost in the playoffs to Crystal Palace. And then, do you know something? The season they won the championship, and there were some tremendous winning runs there, but I can't recall an awful lot about it. I think the two chief goal scorers were Marcus Stewart and Stephen Elliott. And was it Carl Robinson in midfield? He had a decent season. And
Jeff Whitley. Jeff Whitley was the other one.
Yeah, that's right. And Dean Whitehead and Liam Lowers came in. But, it wasn't, even though Sunderland won the title, it felt very different even before the Premier League season to the previous promotion season. And you might be doing like me here, but Marcus Stewart, who had a very, very good season, he left for Bristol Rovers on a free transfer at the end of the season. Was there a gentleman's agreement? Was he? I can't remember why that happened.
I think he was out of contract, and I think he was from
the West Country, wasn't he?
Yeah,
that's right.
It was Bristol City he went to. He had a couple of years there.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, just to go back a little bit, if you look at the season after we got relegated with 19 points,
yes,
we lost. These are the names of the players we lost. Stefan Schwartz.
Yes.
I mean, I'll not give you the full rundown.
It was a fire sale, wasn't it?
Yeah. Stefan Schwartz, Gavin McCann, Geordie Craddock, Thomas Sorensen, Kevin Phillips, Torrey Andreaflow, Claudio Reyna, Emerson Tom, Kevin Kilban, Michael Gray, Thomas Myra, all left, who were relatively important players. And then, if you look at the incomings in that summer, we didn't spend a penny. We signed Jeff Whitley, Gary Breen, Tommy Smith, and then we had 2 short-term loans for Alan Quinn and Stuart Downing. And then in the January, we added Kevin Cooper on loan, who barely played, Byfield, who swapped for Michael Proctor.
Yes.
And then we had another short-term loan for Colin Cooper, I think was just an injury loan.
Yes, that's right.
And then Carl Robinson came in from Portsmouth. So we lost.
You're forgetting Brian Dean, I think.
Brian Dean was not the season after?
Oh, yeah, he was. You're right.
The season after, yeah, because Brian Dean played in the game, obviously, we got promoted on, didn't he? So that was the season after. But I'm on about this, obviously, the season before. So we lost virtually every player we had of value, bar Julio Arca.
Yeah,
take.
That's
and
right.
Brought nobody in.
You're right.
And we managed, we managed to finish third in the table with 79 points. And obviously, we got beaten in the semis of the playoffs. But
the FA Cup. Semi-final of the FA Cup.
Yes, of course. That's right.
So, that when Ian said he can barely remember that time, I'm the same. I have to think a little bit more about that period than I do the other seasons. But it's seriously underrated, that job, when you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Mick McCarthy, if he did make a silk purse out of a pig's ear, he certainly made the very most. His wheeling and dealing was pretty good that season, and when they went up pretty comfortably. But if we then move to the close season ahead of the Premier League season of 2005-06, now this is a real warning of history. People always say, get your recruitment right. Sunderland's recruitment in the summer of 2005 was absolutely dreadful. Kelvin Davies came in goal. I think he cost about 1.3 million. He'd had it half-decent career, but he was dreadful. John Stead, £2 million. He scored his first goal at Everton, I think it was in April, with Sunderland marooned at the bottom of the table. Didn't Love Supreme bring out T-shirts saying, I've seen John Stead score. Then there was Andy Gray, £1 million, barely scored a goal. Tommy Miller, a free transfer from Ipswich. Now, that one kind of makes sense, but he just looked out of his depth. And can anyone remember the French midfielder Christian Basila?
Yeah.
Yes.
And, so, that season, I think most fans feared the worst. And their fears were confirmed within 11 minutes of the opening game of the season against Charlton, when a certain Darren Bent scored for the visitors. Sunderland lost that 3-1. And they lost their first 5 games of the season.
We did have a brief moment of hope in that Charlton game when Andy Gray scored. I remember that.
He did. He scored. Yeah. Yes.
We were like, "Whoa, who's this we've got?" And then we just
equalised and lost 3-1. But I mean, the first 5 games. I think by the end of August, I think most fans were resigned to their fate. And by mid-January, Sunderland had only won 1 game, and that was at Middlesbrough, the derby at Middlesbrough, and of course, infamously, their only home win that season was the final home game of the season against Fulham. And they were relegated with 5 games to go. Mick had lost his job. Kevin Ball came in. It was almost as depressing for Sunderland fans as their first 3 seasons in the 3rd tier.
Well, could you argue, Ian, that Sunderland had never been promoted or have never been promoted in their history in a worse position than we were in when Mick McCarthy took us up in terms of finances and where the club was?
I think that's a fair point, Chris. I think by this stage, Bob Murray knew he couldn't compete with an awful lot of clubs. And what was how much to spend? It was certainly less than 10 million.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it now. We paid a tiny fee for Daryl Murphy, just under 2 million for John Stead, 1.25 million for Kelvin Davis, 1.1 million for Andy Gray, and then the rest were loans or free. I was going to ask you about that, Ian,
right.
because those 3 seasons where we were competing for promotion in 2 of them, then inevitably were promoted. We barely spent a penny. At all. What was the feeling? I can remember the feeling around Murray at the time was certainly that he wanted out, and that was why the purse strings were being drawn.
That's right. There was no stardust. I think McCarthy was squeezing every last drop out of the side, but I'm sure if you ask him, he knew he was managing with both feet tied together. It was hard, Something that season. Obviously that was the season where people compared to the Derby side and the Southampton side, which has lost so badly this year. They didn't lose an awful lot of games heavily, but there was just this grim predictability, wasn't it? I can't remember the goal difference was excessively bad, but
I remember the derby against Newcastle in October at St James's Park was a really good example because we actually played really well and scored a couple of goals.
3-2, that's right, yeah.
And still lost.
Well, just on that, Chris, as well, I mean, they've kind of been forgotten about the 2 goals in that game from Sunderland. But when you think about iconic moments in derbies from down the years, obviously they're all in victories pretty much. But the 2 goals we scored that day were unbelievable, and I can remember I was at that game, and I can remember thinking, we've got a chance here. This team are given quite a lot, and obviously it turned out not to be the case, but we did because that was pretty early in the season, wasn't it? It was like October time, and we'd struggled obviously, but we gave a decent account of ourselves.
That was one of the better ones, and if you can remember the derby at the Stadium of Light, Gavin. I mean, was Sunderland already down by then? I mean, they took the lead through Justin Hoyt, who was one of the better players that season, but it was arguably the least celebrated Sunderland goal in the Tyne-Wear derby in history because, I don't think Sunderland, I think there were gaps on the terraces. And although Sunderland raised the game in the first half, and I think 1-0 up, as soon as Newcastle equalised, there was again an inevitability about the result. And Shearer, of course, with his last ever kick in professional football, scored a penalty.
That was my least favourite ever loss against Newcastle.
Yeah.
I was at the 5-1, and I thought this was worse because they just took the piss from the minute they walked on the ground. The fans, because we were desperate. I mean, you mentioned it there, but there was it's struggle to believe this really now, but obviously you can understand given the circumstances. 40,000 people for a derby game.
Yeah,
so that was 8,000 empty seats.
Yeah.
One thing I've always kind of thought about teams getting promoted, Ian, and one thing I've never really understood in football is you've got a manager who does a fantastic job, and let's take Denis Smith, Mick McCarthy, Peter Reid, and they do a fantastic job to get these teams up.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the first two cases we talked about where we were relegated, Denis Smith, we think, well, he's still a good manager. But the fact that we're struggling in a better league doesn't make him a bad manager. Peter Reid, the same. We ended up getting relegated. Stick with him. In this case, Mick McCarthy's probably your best bet to get back.
Yeah.
Yet the club sack him. Now, it's a strange thing in football, isn't it, where managers get sacked for being successful almost when they get a team up to the Premier League, but then struggle.
Yeah, I know. Again, it's a bit condescending to say I felt sorry for Mick McCarthy, but when he was sacked, relegation was looking inevitable. Well, actually, as I said earlier, relegation felt inevitable since day one, and I just think it was just a case of there was no more he could do. It wouldn't have surprised me if he'd fallen on his sword, even because I think what was really killing him right at the end was just the failure to win games at Stadium of Light.
Yeah, just on that, Gav, because it's in the context of the upcoming season. Let's say we win one in the first 5 games or something like that. It's got to be done in the context of thinking, we know that Labry's a good manager and we know we're in a good place. And it's not kind of thinking, oh, well, everything's just gone to crap because we've lost a few games. Sometimes like in this case, it's almost thinking Mick McCarthy is a good manager. And yes, results aren't going right, but he's been outdone too. But you've got to put the results sometimes in the context and think, just a few results doesn't make someone bad at his job.
Yeah. And I think this is something, as you've just touched on, that I think we might have to prepare ourselves as fans for, because we might have a great season, but we are going to lose games. There's no doubt about that. Even good teams in the Premier League lose games and lose heavily sometimes. And I think there's got to be an adjustment in your mind that almost we are going to lose. We haven't been used to losing for a long time now. Last time we were chronic losers was that season under Coleman and Grayson. We've won games virtually every season we've played since then, albeit that a lot of that was in the third tier. So, yeah, you've got to adjust. And for me, and I said this privately in our chat yesterday, I would almost like to think that people will look past whatever happens next season, if it is a bad season, if it's negative, and kind of focus on the fact we've got a really good manager, we've got a really good coach there, and the answer to your problems isn't always to sack them, because you then have to start again. You have to rebuild in their image almost. I know it's a little different now with head coaches rather than managers being at the helm, but we've got to try and have a different approach to things. I think once you get a good manager, try and keep them, because we've seen that in the past. I think there are many regrets about the fact Peter Reid left when he did, and he probably regrets the way it ended, because he didn't go on to have a very good career in management after that, did he? He had a handful of jobs where he didn't succeed, and then ended up being sort of an assistant or a coach under various other people. And then Mick McCarthy, on the other hand, we chop Mick McCarthy, we get rid, and then he goes on to take teams to the Premier League again. And you kind of think, well, could he have stuck around? Could he have been given the time to build a Sunderland side with a bit of money behind him? When the Drummondville lot came in, could Mick McCarthy have been given that resource to take us forward? We'll never know, but it's something certainly to reflect on, that if you've got a good manager, don't always just break at the first sign of stress and get rid, because it doesn't always mean you're going to be good down the line.
And of course, Gavin, the next permanent manager to come in after Bawley's caretakership and Niall Quinn sacking himself was Mick McCarthy's nemesis,
Yes.
Roy Keane, and the next. Wow, we talk about Niall Quinn's magic carpet ride, and the Keane years. Well, there were a few bumpy bumps along the way, but that really was a magic carpet ride, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, that's it. I mean, you think about that promotion, and it was all about momentum, because there is this image that Roy Keane kind of kicks the doors open wide and then wins every game. But after the first two victories at Derby and Leeds, he wins 3 and 10, and we're 19th in the table in mid-November. But that second half of the season, with the additions from the summer transfer deadline, and then Carlos Edwards, Stern
what
John,
signing, yeah,
Johnny Evans and Danny Simpson, who were huge on loan as well.
Yes,
but
that's right.
But and we had no real kind of big goal scorers. Connolly was top scorer on 13, then Daryl Murphy on 10. But that season, it was all about momentum that eventually took us into the next season after that.
Absolutely. I can remember watching a game on television around Easter time against Southampton down at St. Mary's. And if memory serves me correct, I think the Saints went ahead, but you just felt Sunderland were going to score. Was it Ledbetter and Edwards got the goals?
Yes, that's correct.
And you're right. I mean, momentum is this most wonderful, wonderful thing in football. And I think I said to you last time I was on the podcast, I was a little bit worried that Sunderland had lost theirs when the playoffs were secured in April, and they did to a certain extent. But yeah, I mean, with Sunderland, it was an amazing second half of the season. There was, let's start with those games in September against Derby and Leeds, and there were a flurry of signings. I can remember on transfer deadline day, I remember Louise Wanlers, God rest her soul, she was sending, was it faxes in those days or emails? I can't remember. And there was a signing coming every 5 minutes. It was, there was Dwight York, Robbie Elliott came from Newcastle. There was Ross Wallace. It was just unbelievable. It was 6 or 7 on the day. And it worked. It worked.
Yeah.
But as you correctly said, Gavin, momentum. Sunderland in the second half of the season, they just ran out believing they were going to win.
Yeah, well, that deadline day, just to go through it, Dwight York from Sydney, Graham Kavanagh from Wigan, Stan Varga and Ross Wallace from Celtic, Liam Miller from Manchester United, and David Connolly from Wigan. And we had to do that, though. When you look at the results to that point in the squad we hadn't assembled a good enough team. Keane recognised this and waved his wand, didn't he? And I imagine, I don't know if you can remember, Ian, but it wasn't all plain sailing and getting Roy Keane to the club either, was it? Turned us down. He'd already turned us down, and they went back for him.
I think the press, we found out at half-time, we were covering a Middlesbrough match, and the story broke at half-time at that Middlesbrough match. So I think we were having to split our screens and keep one eye on what was happening at the Riverside and write this sensational Sunderland story on the other side of the screen. But, after Sunderland won promotion, and we were talking about how the frugality of Sunderland spending in the 2005, ahead of 2005-06, but ahead of the 2007-08. I mean, you could call it scattergun, but of course the Drummondville Consortium had come in at the time. And, well, put it this way, you need a lot more than 10 fingers to count how much was spent. And some of them proved successful, some of them didn't. The first signing was a certain Greg Halford for 2.5 million. Was it from Reading?
Who Reading couldn't wait to get rid of, by the way.
Exactly.
He'd only been there 2 minutes.
That's right. So he wasn't a success. Paul McShane, 2.5 million, not really a success. But then, Craig Gordon became the country's most expensive keeper, £9 million. You had Kieran Richardson, £5.5 million.
He was a massive signing.
Huge signing.
Because he just not long come off the back of basically keeping up West Brom.
Yep, that's right.
Hadn't he? And
that's right. They wanted him. Michael Chopra, all right, controversial these days, but £5 million, scored the winner on the opening day, scored some crucial goals.
Wasn't Chopra the top scorer the season before? Possibly. He was up there for Cardiff, I think, was it? For
Cardiff, that's right, yeah. The signing kind of made sense. And then there was Darren Higginbottom, 2.5 million, not a bad play, and then, of course, just when the season was starting, Kenwyne Jones came along, and I think I've got it down here that he got 6 million. So, that's well over £20 million Sunderland spent then.
Sorry, Ian, did you mention the world record transfer fee for a keeper there?
Was it world?
Yeah, you mentioned it. Yeah.
British.
Certainly British.
Sorry, British. Yeah, but would you say this, because this one, again, talking about differences, this one was slightly different in that if you look at the other ones, it was what do we need to do to stay up? Now, I think in this case, Roy Keane was thinking, what do we need to do to finish in the top half?
Well, he
was in a hurry.
I agree with you. And I can remember a press conference when Boyle Sports announced a sponsorship, and all the Irish directors were there. Of course, Boyle Sport was an Irish betting company, and the chairman or the chief executive, he was sitting at the desk with Roy Keane. And I remember, I think it was my question, said, how far can Sunderland go with this man in charge? And was it Mr. Boyle himself? I don't know who it was, but turned around, he said, it wouldn't surprise me if Sunderland would be challenging for Champions League football before too long. And I remember Keane's face. It was a picture. It spoke 1,000 words. But, that season, as we mentioned, all those signings, there was a degree of scattergun about it, but some of them proved very, very good. And, Sunderland, they had only 4 wins before the new year in that 2008 season, but they got the wins just when they needed them. And then in the second half of the season, the home form was very impressive indeed. I think they won 4 in a row: Bolton, Portsmouth, Birmingham, and Wigan at home. So suddenly they never did get sucked right into the mire. And then around Easter time, they strung together 3 wins: away at Aston Villa and Fulham, home against West Ham, and that was them safe. So yes, there was flirtation with the bottom 3 in the first half of the season, but for a first season back up, it wasn't too bad a campaign, was it?
No, and I can remember being really excited that summer about Sunderland's transfer business. I was just leaving school that summer, and we moved into a new school, and we had tellies on the walls with Sky Sports News on, and it just felt like every day there was a new, because that's the only way I used to watch it, and there used to be a new rumour about Sunderland, who they were going to be signing. But when I look back at it now, I look at the business we did. We signed almost exclusively either from the Championship or from other British countries. We didn't. It kind of reminds us a little bit of Ipswich this year, where Ipswich went to the Championship and just raided the best players, didn't they? And it didn't work for them. But if you look, Halford from Reading, Russell Anson came in from Aberdeen, Chopper from Cardiff, and we mentioned before, Dick Matuhu from Norwich, Paul McShane from West Brom, Craig Gordon from Hearts, as you mentioned before, Roy O'Donovan from Cork. We signed Ian Hart and Andy Cole on frees. Higginbottom came in from Stoke, who were in the Championship at the time, and then Kenwyne Jones in from Southampton in the Championship. So we didn't go out and buy, other than Kieran Richardson, we didn't spend money on anybody who was a proven Premier League footballer.
No, although Gordon, that raised eyebrows across Britain. He was seen as an outstanding goalkeeper. And if you can remember, in the new year, Phil Bardsley came, Andy Reid, and then £2 million, a certain striker called
Prika. Yeah, who actually I used to feel sorry for him. He didn't really play many games. He scored on his debut.
Then apparently couldn't get a Ballon d'Or.
Was it, who did he play against? I can't remember, Chris, but he played against someone and had a bit of a shocker. And then I think Keane just lost faith in him, didn't he? Was it Liverpool or something where he just didn't have a particularly great game? I can't remember now. But that was it. Yeah, it was Liverpool. So he got subbed on.
Right.
He got subbed on for Kieran Richardson after 7 minutes, and he took him off after 55 minutes.
Right.
So that's how well he played, and we got beat 3-0.
And then didn't Sunderland they secured safety with the win against Middlesbrough? But I think by that stage you felt Sunderland were going to stay up.
Well, we were never in the bottom 3 after 19th of January.
That's right.
We lost the Spurs on 19th of January, landed in the bottom three. We were 18th, and then the following game we beat Birmingham 3-0.
Right.
Which was the game Preaker made his debut in and scored. And
that's right. Yes.
We were never in the bottom three again.
But it's a really strange one, isn't it, this season, that even though we were in the bottom three that season, because I remember thinking that, but I, in the back of my mind, I never thought we would go down that season. I never thought Sunderland would be really dragged into it.
One of my favourite Sunderland goals would be when Andy Reid came off the bench against Wigan.
West Ham, wasn't it? West Ham.
No, I think it was Wigan, and he did a superb crossfield ball to Darren Murphy, who scored an absolute thunderbolt of a goal. It was a wonderful pass, equaled by a wonderful finish. So
that was Andy Reid's debut, by the way. So he came on the pitch. I think he'd been on the pitch. He'd been on the pitch a minute and played that ball.
That's right. I remember because the press box at the time was down just above the dugouts. And I remember he received the ball just in front of us, and you thought, "Wow, he was great." And I mean, I can remember off the record, Roy Keane told the press that if we can keep his weight down, then he'll do well. But I thought he's a wonderful player to watch, actually.
Yeah. No, I think he should have done bigger things in the game. But just on this, looking at the strategy we used in this one, which you've described as scattergunning, is there that balance when you get promoted and you've got a team who's gone through that together and they've got that togetherness? Is the balance between you need new players, but you've also got this spirit which is going to get you so far even on its own, but then you've got people you need quality, really.
You do. And I think there was just so much faith in Roy Keane at the time. He was allowed to do what he wants. That Drummondville, there was the Irish economic crash the following year, when everything changed. But they were hugely ambitious at the time. And they, I can remember I was covering Republic of Ireland matches quite a lot. And I remember getting in, I'm going left field here, but just to let you know this little story. And I got a taxi at Dublin Airport into the city centre. And after 5 minutes, I remember that the taxi driver was calling me Ian. And I was thinking, how does he know me? And it was because my stuff, which is going inside the paper in this country, it was getting back page leads in the Irish Daily Star. And the whole country couldn't get enough of Sunderland and Roy Keane. If you can remember, there was talk of a supporter of a Sunderland club shop in Cork. And I think were there 2 chartered planes every match day from Ireland. And, to this day, Sunderland have a large fan base across the water. And that's mainly because of Quinn and Phillips.
I told a story, I think it was on a podcast the other week, and I can't remember which one it was, but
Quinn and Keane, sorry.
I went to Cork with my mates from uni who were all from kind of Essex and London, and we were in the one place that was open at about midnight, because there's only one nightclub, or there was at the time, in Cork, and we were in this place drinking, and the lads needed the loo, and I didn't know where it was, so I said, right, well, we'll go and find it. And we're in the loo, and the 2 mates are on the other side talking to each other, but in Cockney and Essex style and all this. And then I saw these Irish lads go, give them the wink and go, and then they started shoving them around a little bit and going, oh, English, are you? And all this. And I went, oh, no. So I went over, and this was right in the thick of King being manager and stuff. And I went over, and I just went, so they knew there was someone else there with them. I just went, oh, you all right, lads? What's happening, And they went, where are you from? I went, Sunderland. They went, oh, Roy Keane, come with us. And they basically dragged us with them. And I did shots at the bar with them for about 2 hours talking about Roy Keane and Sunderland.
Yeah.
But I think that my mates would have been in trouble if I hadn't gone over and just said something. But you're right. I mean, the amount of Irish players we had, and obviously the Keane and the Quinn and Keane influence. I mean, like you said, as you probably experienced it more than us, that Ireland couldn't get enough of Sunderland.
They couldn't get enough, and of course, quite a few Sunderland Irish players as well, Reid, McShane, and etc. So absolutely, Sunderland were arguably a bigger story in Ireland than they were in England.
Yeah. I went over for the pre-season. I think it was the pre-season after promotion in Ireland. Just looking now, it was. We played Bohemians, Cork, and Galway in pre-season. We'd done an Irish tour, and it was unbelievable. Just the amount of coverage and following that we got on that tour. I remember the Cork game in particular. It was because it was Roy Keane's return to Cork, and it was absolutely rammed full of people. And Sunderland were really embraced at the time in the country. It was a fascinating. So you wonder now, because we haven't had many Irish players really over more recent years. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
But he was, along with Brian O'Driscoll, Ronan O'Gara, and Paul O'Connell, the three great Irish rugby players. They were, I think, Keane was a huge personality.
Yep.
And it was funny when we talked to him, because he was that Cork man, and he always had this little dig about Dublin. So it's quite funny.
So we've been through them all, Ian. What was your favourite to cover?
Listen, it's got to be the 105 points one, because you knew you were going to get goals, you knew you were going to get wins. So that was incredible. And again, at the end of the season, crucially, you knew they weren't going to be involved in a relegation scrap.
Yeah. And Gav, as a fan, I know you weren't around for the early one, but as a fan, what was your favourite, including the most recent one?
I might shock you with this one, but I'm going to say this one.
I knew you were. You're not going to shock us at all. I knew you were going to say that.
No, and it actually, I would. This might shock you even more. The 105 point one would probably be third on my list.
Ooh,
it would.
What would be the next one? The King.
Keane, mainly because I was of an age where I was going to games with my mates on my own, and it was great. You know what I mean? Like, and like Ian touched on before, that second half of the season, the momentum was ridiculous.
It was.
Whereas the promotion under Reid was amazing and the football was unbelievable and it was inevitable and we won every week. With that one, we were still chasing to a degree. And then after Christmas, we were like a boulder rolling down a hill. But it wasn't all plain sailing, and that meant that there was a bit of jeopardy leading at the end of the season. And some of those games...
They lost to Colchester in one of the last games seen. I think they lost at Colchester.
I think it was Colchester, and we also we had a couple of little tough moments there where Southampton was a close game. We were getting beat.
Mm-hmm.
We beat Wolves 2-1, and then we had that game against Burnley, which was back and forth.
What a game!
Yeah,
what a game that was.
Murphy scores early on. They get a penalty just before half time, and then just after half time, Wade Elliott scored an absolute screamer, and you're thinking, oh no, it's not going to be our night. And then Connolly scores a penalty after having missed one, and Carlos Edwards puts that back,
scored a worldie. Which I would imagine that. Clearly, the Dan Ballard goal last month will live long in the memory. But as far as winning promotion, that Carlos Edwards rocket against Burnley, I think everyone who was there will recall that with very, very fond memories.
Yeah. And I was down at Luton on the last game of the season when we won 5-0 to secure the title as well, and it was just a great time to be a 15, 16-year-old lad going to the games. But the most recent one for me, and it might be recency bias, Chris, but it's just the way we did it. I can't imagine we'll ever see anything like what happened in that second leg and then the final ever again at Sunderland.
After saying so much of the bad stuff is typical Sunderland, this was very untypical Sunderland to do it the way we've done it. But just to finish things off, Ian, to bundle them all up, because when I was looking at them, I was going through them, and something became apparent as I was going through them. Like, if you look at all those past promotions, it appears to me that and we talked about, all of the conversations was about the characters. Yes. Peter Reid, Mick McCarthy, and Roy Keane. And it feels like those past promotions were all about a character dragging us into the Premier League. Whereas this most recent one, I would maybe argue that we've now got confidence in the club as a whole and the structure we've got, rather than one person who's potentially done the job.
Yes, to a certain extent. Listen, let's all be honest. We've all looked at the next season's Premier League, and it's tough to find three teams you think will finish below Sunderland. Let's be honest about that. But there is something different, I believe, with this team than all the other promotions, and that is the potential and the ceilings of the young players. There are 8, 9, 10 players who are predicted to have very, very promising careers. I don't need to go through them. We all know who they are. You just have to look. Sunderland, I think the squad is valued about 180 million now. Now, they're going to lose Bellingham. That will be a blow. He was my player of the season last season by a distance. I think the key for Sunderland this season, I agree with you that it's not necessarily about the managers. When I look at successful teams, I look at fullbacks, maybe, because I played my Sunday morning football as a centre-half. I loved having good fullbacks. Do you know, this might sound bizarre. I think the key to Sunderland's season is how well Hume and Sirkin will adjust to the Premier League, because I think we all hope that Mayenda will do well. We don't know how many goals he'll score, but he is Premier League quality. Chris Rigg is going to get better and better. You look at those two, and if those two flourish, I think that gives Sunderland a great chance, because it means they'll be relatively solid, and they will blend in with a good attack-minded midfield. So I think in a bizarre sort of way, those two hold the key to it, which sounds a bit cryptic. I know that.
No, I get that, because we've had, particularly when you think about those seasons towards the end of our last stint in the Premier League, where we just struggled to stay up. I can remember thinking, we haven't got any bloody fullbacks. We never seem to have a left or right back. We never did. We'd have people out of position. We'd have Colback and Gardner. We'd have
absolutely
Virginia and
whoever. I hate
O'Shea
seeing people playing in wrong
yeah.
position. I can remember when Keegan took Newcastle from the second tier to the first tier. They'd nearly gone down the previous year. He bought 3 players. He bought Bracewell from Sunderland, but then he bought 2 fullbacks, Barry Venison and John Beresford. They transformed that team. And I look at the great Arsenal team of Wenger, with Dixon and Winterburn. I just think it's a key. Yes, I think Sunderland will need to bring in a pacey centre-half. I think they'll need to bring in at least one experienced midfielder. But, this is a squad that the fan base has fallen in love with. And I can't think of the last group of players that you could say that about. Well, I think we're probably talking the Reedy team, but these are a group of youngsters who they brought a bond and a connectivity between club and fans. There's a pride in them, isn't there? Don't you just get a glow when you hear the youngest side ever to go up, the youngest side in all 4 divisions? I think Sunderland fans take a genuine pride in that. Yeah.
Do you think there's a balance we've got to find between not breaking this team up and try, but because let's give you an example, Ian, and we've talked about this in a previous podcast, but let's say the Henderson rumour is true, and you've got a 22-year-old in Triantis who's had a fantastic, year out on loan. Now you want to develop these players. Bringing a 35-year-old sounds fantastic, and all his experience, it sounds brilliant. But then does he stop that pathway of that younger player? Do we have to be careful of that this summer?
Listen, it's a problem of every single club, isn't it? There's the striker who Sunderland, I think they're still quite keen on, Dan from Liverpool, Denis. Yep. His route's been blocked by world-class players. Wouldn't it be lovely if Sunderland had youngsters whose route were being blocked by world-class players? It's a tough, unforgiving league, the Premier League. Alan Hansen said years ago, you don't win anything with kids. Well, Manchester United, that season proved it, and Sunderland, to a certain extent, have proved this season that you can. But, there is a very, very delicate balancing act for Speakman and Labrie to perform this year. And I think it's safe to say that all these young players, not all of them will play 20, 25, 30 games this season. There will have to be some significant recruits to the club.
Yeah. Just final word, Gav, for you on the promotion, that point that I made earlier. How do you find it? Because there's that strange situation that we're not putting our hat on a character who's in charge. We're putting faith in the club as a whole and how we're run now.
Yeah, and I think that can only be a good thing, because then you end up having situations like we had. I'm just one off the top of my head, Darren Bent leaving Sunderland, and everyone thinks, oh bloody hell, the world's going to end with Darren Bent leaving. We've had it before, Madja leaving when we were in League One, even in that January, and failing to replace him adequately, which cost us promotion. It's not the case this time round. Like, we're talking about Joe Bellingham, and I think Ian talks about pride in the team and stuff. I think even now, because people are so, we're probably educated on the way the club is run now, and the way we do things and the processes that we do, and we've seen the benefit of it by getting promoted to the Premier League. I think now fans see us being, one of our best young players in Joe Bellingham. Looks like he's off to Borussia Dortmund, but we actually take a bit of pride in that, because we're now saying Sunderland's a club where, whilst we are still developing ourselves and improving, we won't block the pathways of young players who are maybe, maybe destined for something a little bit better than Sunderland right now. And a part of that is because we have faith in the club's ability to, right? We got 30 million for Joe Bellingham just off the top of my head. We have faith that we're going to go out and spend that money wisely, and we're not going to waste it. And that is a thing to be proud of. And I don't fear losing Bellingham. I would fear losing 5 or 6 players, but I don't think we're going to see that. I think we're going to maybe see Watson's already gone there. That money's been banked. Bellingham's another one. I'd be shocked to see anybody else of high repute leave, which then means what you're doing effectively, you're just adding to your team, and you've got faith in your recruitment and your sporting director to find the players. And then you've got faith in your head coach, who's already done a brilliant job to carry on his good work, even if that is in the Premier League, where it's a lot more difficult. So there is a different feeling about this promotion. There's almost a sense that it's going to be okay regardless of what happens. What's the worst that can happen? You go down with parachute payments. At least we're not going to be hundreds and hundreds of millions in debt this time and not see any of it. We would go down and we'd be better placed. So it's like, what's the worst that can happen, really? Let's just shoot for the stars, see how high we can go, and if we don't succeed, we don't succeed. It is what it is.
Well, what a perfect way to end this podcast. Whatever happens, it'll be all right, Gav says. I'll quote him at that point. But Ian, we've kept you for long enough, and it's been an absolute pleasure. But we did discuss the potential of doing a best 11 from all these promotions campaign.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, as I've already intimated, the strike force isn't going to take a lot of thinking.
No, I think we'll be pretty quick on that, but the back four might be tricky. But anyway, we'll get you back on and do that, Ian. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Enjoy your summer. Take care.
Good stuff. And Gav, that was absolutely fantastic for a start. But again, loads to come on How We're the Podcast.
Yes, we've got plenty to come over the coming days. We've got an interview you did with Michael Turner a couple of years back coming up over the coming days, which is from the vault. We'll be releasing that on Sunday, news pod on Saturday morning, and then on this week, once again, with you, Martin, Kelvin and Andrew on Monday. So lots to come over the coming days on the feeds.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And Kelvin talks a lot about Dave Watson, so everyone should listen to that. Absolutely fantastic. But thanks again, Gav. Much appreciated, mate.
No problem, Mark. No worries.
Good stuff. And thanks again, everyone, for listening. As Gav says, we've got loads to come. And obviously, have a look on the Roker Report website for everything we put on there daily and our daily releases on How We're the Podcast. But from us, bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.